Before we get started, please go over to Amazon.com and grab a copy of my book, Education and Justice. If you have an African-American son in public school, you need this book because I teach you the many ways that public schools mistreat African-American boys and what you can do to help your son. So go over there and get your copy immediately. If it wasn't for the white evangelical church, slavery could not have existed. It was the white evangelical church that gave the theological underpinnings for slavery. And the same is true during Jim Crow. Major white religious denominations supported everything the white supremacists did. They justified slavery, they justified segregation, they justified the violence. So without it, there would have been absolutely no way slavery and Jim Crow and the stealing of the land from the Native Americans, those were all whites who claimed to know Christ. And also, there would have been no way that the Holocaust would have happened had it not been for white Christians. The German church was all a part of the Holocaust. Now, there was a man who stood against Hitler and the white Christian church in Germany. I want to talk about him in this video. I so greatly admire this man. His name is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. A great man, a good white Christian man who stood with the Jews during the Nazi regime in Germany, and he befriended African Americans here in America. So I want to do this video. If you've never heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, then you have now. And I encourage you to read his books. And there is a movie out now. It's streaming, I believe. I don't think it's still in studios, maybe so. But go watch that movie if you can and read his books. There's one in particular, The Cost of Discipleship. This man wrote that book, this young man. Hitler had him killed in 1945. That made him only 39 years old. He was a young man. And the reason he was killed was because he stood against Nazism. And that was after he spent some time here in America in the early 30s, listening to black preachers and being around black Christians. That gave him the courage and the character to stand against white supremacy. So I want to read an article here about Mr. Bonhoeffer and his stand against Nazi Germany. Now, of course, we're looking at a picture of Adolf Hitler, who was the leader of the Third Reich, the leader of Nazism. In fact, I'm also currently reading a book about Nazism and Hitler, and it is amazing. The book is amazing. It is The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. The Third Reich was the actual regime that Hitler basically led. All right, I want to go to this article here about Mr. Bonhoeffer. Okay, this article was written back in 2020, and it is the Outreach magazine. There is a statue of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and the title of this is Bonhoeffer's Black Jesus. All right, let's begin reading. Race in the Gospel. When you think of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, what immediately comes to mind? Perhaps costly discipleship, German prophet, or confessing church. Only rarely would someone think of the black church in America. Black theology, Harlem, or of him being anti-racist. Bonhoeffer became the hero, prophet, the discipleship leader that we know today precisely because of his time worshiping, serving, and learning with the Black church. In fact, when Bonhoeffer reflected later on the state of his discipleship prior to his sojourn in New York, he bluntly stated, quote, "I had not yet become a Christian," close quote. That's how impactful it was on him to be around Black Christians in Harlem. Bonhoeffer spent a year of his theological training studying at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. Unfortunately, he described his predominantly white seminary and church experiences as insipid and uninspiring, with a notable exception. He became quick friends with Al Fisher, an African-American classmate descended from a lineage of Baptist clergy. Bonhoeffer went with Fisher to visit Abyssinia Baptist Church in Harlem and never left. He loved it. He marveled that he was increasingly discovering greater religious power and originally among the Negroes, close quote. And furthermore, that he had, quote, only heard a genuine proclamation of the gospel from a Negro. While Bonhoeffer experienced the fresh spiritual power and joy of the Black church, he simultaneously made salient observations about the American church as a whole. As a foreigner, it was much easier for him to spot serious contradictions. He warned, quote, "For American Christendom, the racial issue has been a real problem from beginning, and it's a grave problem for the future," close quote. In a country that touted freedom, equality, and opportunity for all, Bonhoeffer was deeply disturbed by America's widespread blindness to its own double standard for people of color. That's amazing. A German came here, a young man, spent some time in a Black church. He had been raised Christian in his German church and community and family, but he said he really didn't experience Christ until he got around some Black Baptist folks. And then he really truly began to see the life of Christ in those Black people as they suffered white supremacists every day, every second of every day. And yet they walked out their Christianity, they walked out their discipleship despite all the hell that they were experiencing. See, this is really touching to see this young white man come to know Jesus by just worshiping and being around Black people, Black Christians. It's very touching. This goes on to say Bonhoeffer wrote about two incompatible versions of Jesus in America. I want you to see this. Two different versions of Jesus in America. A, quote, Black Christ and a white Christ. A Black Christ and a white Christ who were pitted against each other in a destructive rift. It was clear that Bonhoeffer related more profoundly to the Black Christ, not as a recrafting of Jesus into a man of African descent, but in understanding Jesus to identify as a co-sufferer with the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed. You see, that's who Jesus has always been. That's who God has always identified with: the poor, the marginalized, the disenfranchised, the vulnerable in society. Always. It is the white European who has whitewashed the gospel. But the gospel in its originality, he always, that is God, Jesus Christ, has always identified with the oppressed. All right? And he goes on to say, it was in the Black church that Bonhoeffer began to understand discipleship to include costly suffering in solidarity with disenfranchised people. You see, that is true discipleship. When you learn how to walk with Christ by walking with, loving on, and supporting the disenfranchised, not by oppressing the disenfranchised. You won't find God doing that, period. And you won't find his true disciples doing that. His true disciples will always be out there with the marginalized, the disenfranchised, That's what being a disciple means. In fact, Jesus said, if any man is going to come after me or follow me, he must deny himself, pick up his cross, and follow me. That is what Bonhoeffer learned from the black church, because that's what we've had to do. We've literally had to pick up our cross, deny ourselves, and follow Jesus as we have dealt with white supremacy in this country. Anyway, Bonhoeffer went on to say, this article goes on to say, and it was in the black church that one of his friends surmised that they may have witnessed, quote, a beginning of his identification with the oppressed, which played a role in the decision that led to his death. It's time for us to learn more about Bonhoeffer's enlightening journey with the black church. We're living in a time of unprecedented racial upheaval and racial awakening. As we do, we must consider why believers should deepen their understanding of racial realities and racial injustices. Like Bonhoeffer, we should do so as a matter of discipleship, to experience more of Jesus Christ, who so deeply identifies with those who suffer. We also should do so to open our eyes to all kinds of injustices everywhere that we might otherwise miss. Unlike so many of his German colleagues, Bonhoeffer applied what he learned about American racism back in Germany in a surprising way. Through his advocacy for the Jewish people and his resistance to the Nazi regime. As you go deeper in your own racial discipleship journey, may you also be surprised by how God works, both to bring you closer to him and to bring greater shalom to the world. Isn't that a beautiful article? I mean, this man, this good Christian man, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, he learned to follow Christ by serving and loving on the poor, the disenfranchised, the marginalized, those African Americans during the 30s who were catching literal hell from white supremacists. And so Dietrich went back home during the height of the Nazi regime, and he ended up opposing Hitler. So much so that it cost him his life, and he was put to death at 39 years of age. I mean, what a great man he really was. And so I just want to introduce some of you to him, and others of you who already know Mr. Bonhoeffer. I just want to celebrate the man. This is the type of white Christian that we need today. Today. There are some out there, and thank you for every one of you who are out there, but you're so few and far between that we're not really seeing your impact. Some 88%, I believe, of white Christians, really you could call them white Christian nationalists, support everything that you see Trump doing, all the anti-blackness, all of it. Where are America's Dietrich Bonhoeffers? I know you're out there. Some of you I have talked with and met, and some of you I have read your books, like Robert P. Jones come to mind. Others of you I know casually, but so many more need to step forward in this hour. Because if you are going to be a true disciple of Christ, you're going to do what Jesus said. And that is, you are supposed to love on the least of them. You're supposed to visit the sick, visit the imprisoned, feed the homeless, give comfort to the disenfranchised, the distressed, the marginalized. Because that's exactly what he did. When he came on earth, he immediately identified with the least of them. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer just brings a huge smile to my face, a huge smile, as he impacted us today from the example he set after members of our community impacted him almost 100 years ago with the example that we set. So that's Dietrich Bonhoeffer. We are so absolutely honored to talk about Mr. Bonhoeffer and again introduce some of you to this great man. All right. I am Reverend and Civil Rights Attorney Augustus Corbett. Thank you for watching this video and stay woke.